Bruchim haboim, welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Memches Amud Beis, 3 lines from the bottom, from the 2 dots. The Gemara until now discussed the sources for the brachos of Birkas HaMazon. Now our Gemara gets into the various wording, the significant words that must be said in these brachos. Says the Gemara, Tanya, bringing a brayso, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Kol shaloi omar eretz, chemda toiva urechava bebirkas haaretz, umalchus beis Davi bebonei Yerushalayim, lo yatsa yedei choivasoi. Rabbi Eliezer holds that a person doesn't describe the words that are mentioned in Tanakh about the land of Eretz Yisrael as being Eretz toiva, it's good, it's chemda, it is desirous, urechava, and it is expansive, as well as he doesn't mention Malchus Beis David in the bracha of Bani Yerushalayim because Yerushalayim was niskadesh through David HaMelech. Then he's not Yoitze Yidei Chayvasoi. Either it means that he's not fulfilling his obligation and he would have to go back, or it means he didn't fulfill his obligation in its correct form. Nachum HaZaken Omer, Tzarech Sheyizkor Babris. Nachum HaZaken says he must mention bris in the bracha of Noide Lecha, because it was through the bris milah, that Hakadosh Baruch Hu promised Avram and his seed Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Tzorech Sheyizkar B'Torah. You must mention, he says, Torah, because it's Ayidei, the keeping of the Torah and the mitzvahs, that Klal Yisrael gains the Yerusha of Eretz Yisrael. Pleimoy Omer Tzorech Sheyakdim Bris La Torah. Shezu nitna b'shloish brisois, v'zu nitna b'shloishesrei brisois. He says, Plimo, that when a person mentions both Torah and bris, it has to be that he mentions bris before Torah, because bris has 13 mentionings of bris, and Torah has 3 mentionings of bris, and therefore we say Shechasamta bivsareinu v'al taroscha shelim maditonu, in that order. Rabbi Abba Omer, the Brisa continued, Sorech sheyomar ba hoida techila v'soif. One must mention hoida twice, in the beginning, at the end of the second bracha. Noide lecha Hashem Elokeinu, v'al kula Hashem Elokeinu anu modim loch. V'hapoches lo yivchos me aleph. And one should not mention one less. And if he does, and if he does not even mention one of these hoidas in the second bracha, it is disgraceful. The Brisa continues, one who concludes the bracha of Birkas Haaretz with Manchil Artsois, or he concludes the bracha of Bani Yerushalayim with Moshia es Yisrael, Hareze Bur, he's considered to be an ignoramus, an Am Haaretz. Because she'eino oimer bris v'toiro bebirkas Haaretz, umalchus beis David bebonei Yerushalayim, lo yatsi yidei chavosoi. Ad kan the Brisa. Says the Gemara, Messiah leil Rabbi Ilo. This is a support for Rabbi Ilo. The Omer Rabbi Ilo, Omer Rabbi Yaakov, Bar Acha Mishum Rabbeinu, Kol Shelo Omar Bris V'Torah Bebirkas Haaretz, Umalchus Beis David Bonei Yerushalayim Lo Yotza Yedei Choivasoi. Says the Gemara, Pligi Bo Abba Yosi Ben Dostoi V'Rabbanon. There's a machloikis between Rabbi Abba Yosi ben Dostoi and the Rabbanon. Chad Amar Hatoiva Hameitiv Tzricha Malchus, v'Chad Amar Eina Tzricha Malchus. Whether you have to mention Malchus in the 4th bracha of Toiva Hameitiv. Man da Amar Tzricha Malchus, the one who says you do have to mention Malchus, Kisova the Rabbanon. He holds that it's the Rabbanon. It's a rabbinic bracha, and therefore it's not considered to be Samuch Lechaverta, whereby you must have an additional malchus mentioned in that bracha. Uman da Amar Eina Tzricha Malchus, Kisover deraisa. Because it's deraisa, therefore he says it's samuch lechaverta, it would not require another malchus in the fourth bracha. It can be relied upon in the previous bracha. Ton Rabbanon, the Gemara brings a brisa. Mahu choisem bebinyan Yerushalayim. The brisa asks, what is the conclusion, the chasima of the bracha of binyan Yerushalayim? Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Moshia Yisrael. The correct bracha, according to Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, is to conclude with the chasima Baruch Ato Hashem, Moshia Yisrael. Hakadosh Baruch Hu is the savior of Yisrael. Says the Gemara, Moshia Yisrael in binyan Yerushalayim lo. The essence of the bracha is about Yerushalayim. So how can you say that the conclusion is Moshia Yisrael without mentioning anything about Bonei Yerushalayim? Ela emo af Moshia Yisrael. Rather, you must say he means you can even say Moshia Yisrael, but of course the essence, the essential bracha is Binyan Yerushalayim. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Barav Huna ikloi lebei Reish Galuso. The Gemara tells us that he went to the house of the Reish Galuso. Posok bechado v'siyem betarti. He began with one, meaning in the pesicha of the bracha. For example, he said, Rachem no Hashem Elokeinu al Yisrael amecho. And he concluded with two chasimos of Yerushalayim and Yisrael. The opposite of what we do. We begin with saying, Rachem no Hashem Elokeinu al Yisrael amecho va'al Yerushalayim irech. We mentioned two in the beginning. And we conclude, Baruch Ato Hashem bonei Yerushalayim. He did the opposite. Omer Rav Chisda gevurta lemechtem betarti. Is it a gevur? Is it a strength to conclude the bracha with two things? Vehatanya Rebbe Omer ein choismin b'shtayim. The Brisa tells us in the name of Rebbe that you cannot make a chasim of a bracha with two different things. The Gemara brings back this statement, Gufa. Rebbe Omer ein choismin b'shtayim. You cannot conclude a bracha, a chasima, with two different subjects. Eisvei levi l'Rebbe. Al ha'oretz v'al ha'mozoin. There are two different subjects in the bracha, in the second bracha. Al ha'oretz v'al ha'mozoin, or the birkas ha'mozon. Answers the Gemara, eretz demafka mozoin. Eretz that brings out nourishment. Therefore, it's really one of the same subject. Al ha'oretz v'al ha'peiros. In the bracha me'ein sholosh, we say al ha'oretz v'al ha'peiros is two different subjects. Answers the Gemara, no, eretz the mafka peiros. Again, it's the land that brings out the fruits. Mekadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim. In the tefillah we say two seemingly subjects of Mekadesh. Hashem sanctifies Yisrael and the zmanim. Answers the Gemara, Yisrael de kadshinu lizmanim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sanctifies Yisrael, who then make the zmanim. Mekadesh Yisrael v'Rosh Chodashim. Similarly, it seems to be two different subjects in regards to Rosh Chodesh. In the Tefillah we say Hashem is Mekadesh Yisrael v'Rosh Chodashim. Answers the Gemara, no, Yisrael de Kadshinu l'Rosh Chodashim. Through Yisrael, who's Niskadesh, they make Rosh Chodashim. Mekadesh HaShabos v'Yisrael v'Hazmanim. Says the Gemara, here we have different subjects. We have Shabbos and Yisrael Hazmanim. Says the Gemara, Chutz Mizu. This is an exception. In other words, Shabbos really is already Niskadesh. Every seventh day, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sanctifies the Shabbos. Nothing to do with Klal Yisrael. From the Brias HaOlam, there was already Yom HaShvi, that was Shabbos. And yet, HaKadosh Baruch Hu also sanctifies Yisrael. The Gemara says this is an exception. Ask the Gemara, Maishno? Why over here is it okay to choisem with Hashabas v'Yisrael v'Hazmanim? Says the Gemara, because Hocha Chadahi Hasam Tarti. Here, it's really one. In other words, it's all the subject of Kedusha. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who sanctified the Shabbos, sanctifies Yisrael, who are sanctifying then the Zmanim. Hasam, but over there, it's Tarti, two different subjects. Each one is a separate subject in its own. and therefore there's Yisrael and there's Yerushalayim in the bracha in the Birkas HaMazon. V'taima mai ein chois b'shtayim. So why can't a person be choiseim b'shtayim? We saw that Rebbe teaches in the Brisa that you cannot be choiseim b'shtayim. Why not? Answers the Gemara lefishein oisin mitzvos chavilos. We cannot make mitzvahs into bundles. In other words, when you take mitzvahs and you put them together, two different subjects in this case in the brachos, and put them as one chasima, so what you're trying to do is you're taking it and you're trying to then alleviate the burden, so to speak, of in this case, the brachos or the mitzvos, and therefore you're putting them together. And therefore that's considered to be incorrect. You should focus on each one as precious as it is and not try to grab something else and stick it in together with its mitzvahs, another chasima. My hava Allah. The Gemara now asks, what is the conclusion? Rav Sheishis posach berachem al amcha Yisrael. Then Chosim Moshe Yisrael. If he opened up the bracha, he began the bracha mentioning Al Amcha Yisrael, then he should then conclude the bracha of Moshe Yisrael, because then it's going to be consistent. Posach berachem al Yushalayim, then Chosim bebonei Yushalayim. If he began with Rachem al Yushalayim, then he can be consistent and should be consistent by being Chosim bebonei Yushalayim. Rav Nachman Omar afilu posach berachem al Yisrael choisim b'monei shalayim. Even if indeed he began the bracha with rachem al Yisrael amecha, he can still conclude with bonei Yerushalayim. Why? Mishum shenemar, it says in the pasuk, bonei Yerushalayim Hashem. Hashem is the one who builds Yerushalayim. Nidche Yisrael Yechanis, and He's the one who gathers those who are dispersed from Klal Yisrael. When is it that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Bonei Yerushalayim Hashem? When is He called the one who is building Yerushalayim? Bizman shenitcha Yisrael Yikanis, at the time that He gathers in those who are dispersed amongst Klal Yisrael. Omer leRabbi Zeira leRav Chizda Neisi Mar v'Nisni. Rabbi Zeira turns to Rav Chizda and he says, let us study, let us learn Mar and discuss these brachos of Birkas HaMazon. Omerle, Birkas Mezoyna loy gamirna, v'tnuya masninin. You want to suggest that I should learn and teach the bracha of Birkas HaMazon. I didn't learn it properly myself. Omerle, my high. Why do you think so? Why is this? Omerle, di ikloy lebebesh galusa. He tells them the following Maisa. He said, I went to the house of Reish Galusa. Ubrichi birkas mizoyna, and I benched birkas hamazon. V'zakfei Rav Sheishis likoi alai kechivya. And Rav Sheishis he stood up erect and coiled like a snake, as if he wanted to bite me. V'amai. Rav Zera asked him, why would he respond in such a manner to your birkas hamazon? Says Rav Chizda, de loy amri, loy bris, v'loy Torah v'mal malchus. Because I didn't mention not bris, and not Torah, and not malchus. V'amai loy amris, asked Rav Zeh, why didn't you mention it? Kid Rav Chananil omarav. Don't Rav Chananil omarav. Lo omar bris, v'Torah o malchus yotza. If a person doesn't mention these three things, then he's yotzei. Bris lefi she'ena benoshim. Torah o malchus lefi she'ena loy banoshim v'loy ba'avodim. Because these things are not relevant, not to women, and Malchus is not relevant also to Avodim. Omar Lei, so if Zera turns back to him, he says, Va'at shavkis kolhani tanoi va'amoroi va'avi tekerav. You abandon all of the opinions that we mentioned above in the Brisa, the Tanoim, and as well as the Amoroim, and you went like Rav. Now I understand why Rav Sheshes indeed reacted in this way. Says the Gemara, returning to the discussion of the fourth bracha of Hatoiv v'Hametiv. Omar Rabbe Babarchana v'Yochanan, Hatoiv v'Hametiv tzricha malchus. The fourth bracha needs to be mentioning malchus. My kamash malon, asked the Gemara, what is this coming to teach us? Kol bracha she'ein ba malchus lo yishma bracha. Every bracha requires mentioning of malchus. So therefore, what is the chiddush over here? V'ho'amra Rabbi Yochanan chade zimno amra v'zeira loy mashet tzricha shtei malchiyos chade dido v'chade debone Yerushalayim. No, he was saying that this bracha of Hatov HaMeitim needs two malchiyos, one malchus for itself and one malchus to compensate for Bonei Yerushalayim. Ihochi asked the Gemara, need boy tlas, why only mention two malchiyos? Then you should mention three malchiyos in the bracha of Hatov HaMeitiv. Chade dido, one for itself. V'chade de Bonei Yerushalayim, one to compensate for the Bonei Yerushalayim. V'chade de Birkas HaOretz, and one to compensate for the bracha of Birkas HaOretz. Ela Birkas HaOretz, my time alone. Rather, you must say, what's the reason why you don't mention a malchus for Birkas HaOretz? Mishum dahavila bracha smucha lechaverto. Because it's a bracha smucha lechaverto, so therefore you rely on that, and therefore you don't have to compensate for it for Birkas HaOretz. Then Bonei Yerushalayim nami lo tiboy. Dahavila birkas smucha lechaverto. Then so too when it comes to Bonei Yerushalayim, you would not need to compensate for that. So the Gemara says, Hu adin dafilu Bonei Yerushalayim nami lo boy. You're right, you don't have to compensate for Bonei Yerushalayim because it's smucha lechaverto. Ela aidi da Omar Malchus Beis David, but because in the bracha of Bonei Yerushalayim you mentioned Malchus Beis David, lav orach aro d'lo Omar Malchus Shomayim. It would not be correct to not mention Malchus Shomayim. And therefore, you don't want to mention Malchus Shomayim in the bracha of Bonei Yerushalayim, because then you would seem to then equate the Malchus Beis David with the Malchus Shomayim. So therefore, it's compensated by mentioning Malchus Shomayim in the fourth bracha. Rav Papa Amar Hochi Ka'amar Tzricha Shtei Malchios Lebar Midido. He says you need two Malchios aside from its own. And therefore, you'll have three malchus altogether. And therefore you say, Avinu Malkeinu, Adirin Borin Golin, Yotzrin Kedushin Yaakov, Reinu Yisrael HaMelech, HaTov HaMeitiv LaKol. Those are the two, Lebar Midido, aside from that which it requires itself, when you say, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam.